Yeah, we'll just wait one more moment here. We'll get started just to kind of give Jim, just kind of kicking things off to give a little bit of background. Oh, got somebody saying, let me into the meeting. I think she might be using the wrong link.
So is Scott with Quota? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invite, Dan.
Very welcome. I'm sure you have a lot on your plate with your guys being recently acquired by ScalePad. Fortunately, you guys are in the same offices though, correct? So
that's right. Yeah. This past week and a half has been really busy for me and very exciting. We were acquired by ScalePad and longtime channel friends, and the same VC company was involved. Chris Day, you guys may have heard of him, and
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so this merger or acquisition, the co-founders like to call it a merger. They're still keeping the vast majority of their equity and they're staying on. So they're looking at this as like an opportunity to really power up and tap into the talent and human resources, capital resources that ScalePad brings. And we'll be able to focus a lot more on moving our product development cycles a lot faster. And up until this point, I've been a marketing team of one. So I joined about 2 years ago, almost to the month. And I see this as a big, I don't know, in a lot of ways, a relief, because now I get to join a team of 30 of marketing people. Total headcount at ScalePad is just over 200 now. So it's very exciting.
Dan trying to be the next Fred Vacola?
Me? Oh man. Well, I'm only 33 years old, so I guess
no, I mean Dan Wesley.
Years, yeah.
Yes.
His age. And a psychologist would call that denial. Anyways.
So to kind of kick things off, Jim, just give you a little bit more background. I know I sent some information to you, but our community is made up of managed service providers, MSPs from around the world. Overall, they fall into a category which would be aspiring, growing, and mature MSPs. Overall, we're going to see MSPs that ranging anywhere from just a few 100,000 in sales to multiple million in sales. Employee count anywhere from on the small side of 1, 2, 3, all the way up to on the large side of fully staffed organizations with very well-defined positions. But overall, most MSP organizations started with a technician. So most of us are all technical, and so we decided to start a company as the technical person, wearing many hats and growing the business just organically, some through acquisition, but predominantly is going to be more organic growth. Recently in your book, there's one particular area that you talked about that I really want to have us talk through, and that's going to be some of the principles of being more on our business versus in the business. But to kick things off, before we jump into that, can you give us a little bit of background? I know you are the CEO of the CEO Project. You also are an author of at least one book. I know the Great CEOs Are Lazy, which is an incredible book I love, which is what inspired me to reach out to you to bring you here today. Also, I noticed from your history, you were president of a global telecommunications company. So that's what I know. Maybe you can give us all a little bit more of a overview of you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Technical background, did engineering for a brief shining moment, and then went over to the commercial side of the businesses and started running companies fairly young, all technology companies, mostly hardware oriented, but then later hardware, software, services oriented. That was the telecom company that you mentioned. And for the last 18 years, I've been advising CEOs. So I was the sort of chief executive officer of 3 different companies before I started this one. I've been advising CEOs now for, 18 years. So I'm starting to get the hang of it. wrote the book, Great CEOs Are Lazy, based on my experience of sort of what do the really good ones do differently than the more average players. Turns out there is a theoretical base for that I can talk about in a little bit. And then just for fun, I went and became a certified sommelier. So my second book is called Professional Drinking, combining wine knowledge with, business experience and sort of how do you, who knew it was a job, right? I mean, sign me up. I've been doing it for free all these years. So anyway, that's my second book. And, I'm starting to think about a third one. So we'll see. But the one that sort of made the mark was Professional Drinking. It's been well received.
That's awesome.
Wait, you can get a job in that? Where do I apply?
Professional drinking or lazy CEO?
Professional drinking.
I know, right?
Yes.
I didn't know that was a career option.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been doing it wrong all these years.
Exactly. So what I'd like to do before we get into questions that we all have, love to have you give us kind of a synopsis of the Great CEOs Are Lazy, and the principles that you developed and put into the book.
Yep, no problem. So it all starts with a Israeli physicist by the name of Eli Goldratt. And what Goldratt said was that in any system you can name, any system, there is a point of constraint that controls the capacity of the entire system. Think about debottlenecking code, or the same thing with a network architecture. But the simple example would be a garden hose. A garden hose is designed to put water out the other end, but if there's a kink in the hose is not going to perform as specified. And in fact, the kink defines the performance of the entire hose at that point. And so if I'm trying to get water out, I have two jobs: find the kink and open it up. And if I do that, then the system will perform as expected, or maybe above as expected. Same thing's true in a business of any flavor. There's a kink in the hose, there's a point of constraint in the business, and the job of the leader is to find that point of constraint and open it up. Really good CEOs know this intuitively or overtly. And I would say most of them know it intuitively, because we sort of, as talking to them, we did, they're using this mental model. They don't even know that they're doing it, but that's what they're doing. And the other element that Goldratt talked about, he says, all work that is not at the point of constraint is wasted. So all the other stuff we do that is not find the kink and open it up is a waste. And so really good CEOs go over, if I'm doing that, which is my highest and best economic use of my time, everything else I do is well below that economic use, and I should minimize it to the maximum extent possible. And so what I found is when I was talking to CEOs, they said, how many hours a week are you working? They go, 80. I go, all right, this is probably not a very good CEO. And I'm going to say it had about a 95% accuracy in predicting not a very good CEO. The performance of the business was not great. Once in a while, we have to bump up to 80. I get that. That happens. But I mean, consistently, month after month after month at 80, something's wrong with the model at that point. The really good ones would go, I don't know, 50, 60, depends on what's going on. I mean, it's not a 40-hour a week job, let's be clear. And why? Because what they said is, they go, look, I look for what's the most important thing. I spend almost all my time at that. And then I move on to the next most important thing. I minimize everything else through delegation and other strategies. Well, it turns out that the point of constraint can lie in one of three areas. And in the book, I talked about hats. So these are hats that the CEO could wear when they are doing high leverage work. So first, let's start with two, actually. Two, and this is not the way the book reads, Dan, actually, this is bonus content you're getting right now. There are two hats that we use to find the point of constraint. One is learner and one is player. In learner mode, we are analyzing, looking at spreadsheets, looking at metrics, looking at performance, understanding other models that might be out there. So it's sort of an introvert's way of dealing with a problem. The other way to do it is player mode, which is go in and do. And in the doing, the meta work is what's going wrong with this situation and how do I fix it? The example I use, if you were running a call center, for example, and you weren't quite getting the performance you wanted, if you went into that call center and worked for 4 hours on the phones, I darn well promise you, you will know what the problem is in that call center by the time you leave. You will figure it out because you went into player mode. Sometimes that means going on sales calls. Sometimes that means sitting in on engineering meetings, but I mean like actively doing sort of individual contributor role. But as I said, the meta work is what's wrong with this picture, right? With regard to fixing the kink, there are 3 areas that the kink can sit in. And I call these hats architect, coach, and player. So architect deals with the business model itself. What do we do for whom? What profit do we make? What margin do we make? How much demand is there for our product? What's our offer that we make to the market? What's our value proposition? Is it strong enough? All those kinds of questions sit under business model. And I'm going to tell you that if I had to pick one hat to spend most of my time on it, it would be business model. The better your business model, the easier your life. The more difficult your business model, the harder your life. The example I use here is I am not smart enough to make money in a coal mine. Can't do it. It's too hard. It's too capital intensive. I'm not smart enough. I don't know how anybody makes money at it, right? There are other businesses, they go, I could probably make money at that one because it's a better business model. And if you look at a lot of the innovation that's occurred, it's been more around business model than anything else. That's where real wealth is made. It's in business model innovation, less so on technology innovation. Or sometimes technology enables business model, to be fair. The second is coach. This is all about the talent. Do you have A players in the critical roles? Now, notice I say in critical roles, and let me define A player real quickly. You may have heard A's, B's, and C's. B's perform to standard. They do the job. They show up every day. Love them. Awesome employees. Great people. You need lots of B's. A players significantly overperform the role. And the math on this is, generally speaking, going to pay about 20 to 25% more for an A, but you will get on average 70 to 100% better performance out of them. So you get kind of a double for 25%-ish. Well worth it. Now, I would not recommend a whole company full of A players because they'll drive you insane because they ask questions. They say, why do we do that? They are a pain in the butt, but they're right a lot of the time. So you need some, usually 20% would be kind of an optimal number. You don't need more than that. And then the other element is you got to think about where your core value adding processes are and make sure they're A's there. So for example, do we need A players in accounting? Probably not. We can get along with B's in accounting, but in product development, we probably want A's, for example, right? Depending on the nature of your business. So this is recruiting the right talent, retaining the right talent, developing the talent. That's all in the coaching space. There are some leaders that really only work the coaching angle. They go, look, if I get great people and I put them in the right direction, and I'll do fine. I just count on the people. It can work. I think you probably need to think about the business model, but some people do only talent. And then third is processes and systems. So this is how we do what we do. Is it efficient? Is it targeted at the right value prop? Do we deliver consistently? Is it effective? All of those questions are in engineering, in the engineer hat. Included in this is not only the technology, but also the management of culture. If you think about the system of running a business, culture is part of the system of running a business. So managing culture fits under this header as well. Because sometimes I can tell you, I deal with one organization in the academic space, probably the most toxic and dysfunctional culture I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how they get anything done. It's nuts. I mean, none of us would ever want to work in this environment. It is painful to experience and observe. So, clearly they've got a cultural issue. It's not the business model. It's not the people. A lot of the people are good people. It's a cultural issue. So the constraint lies in one of those 3 areas. So when you're doing learner or player, you're asking yourself, is it my business model? Is it the talent I have around this process? Or is it the process itself that needs to be modified? And it's simple as that. Maybe the last element I'll talk about, maybe 2 quickly. We're very strong for people in leadership positions. People talk about the to-do list. We're very strong on the not-do list. And the way you get that is make a list of all of the things you have on your plate. They are excessive and impossible to get them all done, I guarantee you. Make a list about halfway up. Everything below the line that's lower economic value add, I either delegate, defer into the future and hope time solves it, which happens, or I don't do. I literally cross it off my list. I'm never going to do it, and I'm not going to worry about it. Then you're dealing with the top half. Month later, do it again. By the time you do that 2, maybe 3 times, you'll be down to the very limited set of things that make all the difference in your business. And that's where you should be spending 50% of your time or more. All the other junk should fit in the other 50%. And then the last one on delegation. And this is something that really great CEOs are super effective at. A couple of ideas here. One is if somebody is 70% ready, and when I say that, I mean they're 70% as good as you at a job, it's time to delegate it. Most people walk around and saying, well, he's not as good or she's not as good as I am. Well, but you're all in these positions because you have exceptional skills. You are special human beings. So the idea that they've got to be as good as you is an impossible standard. And that if you hold that standard, you'll never delegate anything and you will be working 80 hours a week. So you've got to say 70% delegate and then train them. Now, when I say delegate, realize that there are levels of delegation. Delegate doesn't mean hand it over and I'll never see it again. Level 1 delegation might be, hey, take a look at this, figure out what you think you might want to do, then let's talk and I'll decide what we're going to do. It saved me some work and I've partially delegated it. Maybe up to, hey, go look into this, figure out what you want to do, come up with a plan to do it, send it to me. If I don't tell you to stop, go ahead and do it. So it's like an opt-in, opt-out kind of model on delegation. A higher level might be, hey, take this, do what you want to, just let me know what you did. So now I'm after the fact, I'm learning what they did. That's a higher level of delegation than before you make a move, let's talk and I'll decide. And then the ultimate one, which is what everybody thinks delegation is, take it, it's yours, and I don't really ever want to hear about it again. You own it, right? And it scares the heck out of people because they go, oh my God, delegation means I'll never see it again. No. Depending on the risk and the reversibility of the decision, you work your way up that ladder. You also will need to consider the competency of the person you're delegating to. If it's the first time they've ever seen it, we start them at the bottom of that ladder. As they gain competency, we move them up the ladder and we can delegate more aggressively. So delegate that bottom half is really a super important element. And that's part of how you get down to rational hours is by finding people who are 70% ready, delegating sort of sequentially up the ladder until they can handle these things on their own. So that's the book in a gist. And I just probably screwed up with about 15 book sales here, but that's more or less what the book says is learner, player to find the kink, architect, coach, or engineer to fix the kink with an aggressive use of delegation to try to create the time to spend time at the point of constraint.
Excellent. And on that note of the book, you can pick it up at Amazon. I'm an Audible guy. So I purchased the Audible book. It's just my preference, but the book is definitely out there. In fact, Heather and I were at a conference. Was that in, where were we, Heather? Was it Chicago? It wasn't Miami, was it? But we were talking about it, and she got right into Amazon, ordered the book, and she got it within a couple of days. So
great. Thank you.
So one of the things that we talked about recently is on that aspect of being more on our business versus in the business. One of the burning questions was, how do you determine how much time that you allocate to being on your business? Because many of us, depending on the size of the organization, still need to be, in the trenches and are much more actively involved in the business. So trying to, distinguish that and separate that time, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, and this goes to company size really more than anything else. When we're small, we have no choice but to be CEO and some other functional role, or maybe 2 or 3 other functional roles, depending on the size of the company. In the early days, we have all the functional roles. But if you're going to grow, over time, you have to lose functional roles and move up to more on the business than in the business. And if you get stuck in the business, you will become the point of constraint to future growth because we run out of you. There's just not enough. I liken it to the old-fashioned switchboard operators. If you remember, they're connecting, wires to make, a really good person might be able to do 100 calls an hour. Well, what happens when there's 200 calls an hour? The only 100 are getting through because you can't do more than 100. If you are the nexus for all decisions and all knowledge in your company, you're that switchboard operator. And we run out of you before we run out of stuff. And particularly if you're growing, you now limit the ability of the company to grow. The only antidote to that is to get rid of functional roles by hiring people, delegating, even if they're not quite ready to take the job. So it's really about size, In the single digit millions, you probably have 1 or 2 roles plus CEO. As you get into the 10s and 20s, you should start shedding them. Maybe you have CEO and 1 other role. You get above that, you really need to be thinking about an exec team, and you're really almost exclusively CEO. Not to say you won't dive down into a role once in a while. Like I said, we go into player mode occasionally, but like even Jack Welch, I mean, when he was running GE, he would go make sales calls. So it's not like you can never do it. But
Right.
when you're doing it, you want to be doing that meta work of what's going on here that I could make better more broadly. So while I'm in the business, I'm actually still on the business at the same time.
Excellent. One of the things that we did talk about recently is, scheduling that time to be on your business. Because if you don't schedule it, you're in that forever trap of being in the business, right?
Yep. Absolutely. I had a friend who was a CIO at Goldman Sachs at the time that Goldman was really, really struggling on the technology part. And he said to his admin, I want you to block 2 hours every day. And I don't care who's calling. I'm working on the things that are going to make this business better for 2 full hours every day. That, in a big business, that's about all you can get sometimes. And he said, basically, if the building's on fire, you have the right to drop that to 1 hour, but it never goes to 0, right? And I think that was good discipline on his part. And he would say that was a big part of how I turned the wheel on that particular organization. This is a number of years ago.
So before I open up to any of our members to ask any questions, there's one thing that really caught me in the book, and it's about the engineering hat. And I'm going to just read the quote from the book. What the best organizations have come to realize is that the CEO wearing the engineering hat should always think more about IT applications and less about hardware and infrastructure.
Yep.
So, we often talk about this on our calls, that we need to stop having conversations with our clients about blinky lights and have more business process discussions. Talk about their workflow, look for where there's obstacles and bottlenecks. What ways can technology improve that and also improve efficiencies, their clients' experience? So taking a look at that, can you expand a little bit more on that aspect?
Yeah. So the telecom company I ran, it was actually a telecom in-network test company, as it turns out. And we were really a layer 1 through 3 company trying to get higher. And nobody cared about layer 1 through 3. People care about application layer, and to some extent presentation layer. And so that's where the value, that's where the business case exists at the higher level of the ISO stack, not at the lower level of the ISO. That's essentially what I was saying in that document. People spend a lot of time talking about, routers and, like nobody cares. That should be like turning on the water. That should always work. It should always be reliable. And when you say, oh, by the way, when you turn on the faucet, the water always comes out, everybody goes, oh, okay, great, super, right? I talk about some jobs as zero upside, infinite downside jobs. Infrastructure is one of those. It's a zero upside. If everything works perfectly, nobody notices. If anything goes wrong, they lose their minds, right? So it's really hard. But from a selling somebody, particularly as you move up into higher levels of executive management, they're going to have the reaction I did. But if you say, hey, look, we can save you money or accelerate your process or improve your customer experience or improve your employee experience, they go, I'm listening. And that all sits on a highly reliable infrastructure. But I'm talking about higher level. I'm looking at application layer conversation. That's where the sex appeal is.
Yeah.
Kind of along these lines, I saw a movie on a plane on the way to Florida on Friday called Blackberry, the story of Blackberry.
Oh, I've heard this is a good movie.
You guys got to watch this. And it kind of dovetails into some of what you're saying.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just heard about that. Actually, yesterday I was on a call and heard about that. I've got that one on my list to watch. Looking forward to that one. So what I'd like to do is before I have got tons of questions for you. We could be here for hours and hours, but I don't want to take advantage of that. I'd like to offer anybody up who's got a question that they'd like to ask Jim.
Jim, if commentary counts, I wanted to just mention that, first of all, the only other IT-related person I've ever met who studied to be a sommelier, although apparently you practiced your art, and I just figured that I could drink for free at a Wine Spectator listed Friends restaurant, and this was
Nice.
a free online course. It was great. However,
Nice.
your book,
Did you go up WSET or Guild of Master Sommeliers?
there was a master sommelier that
Nice.
used to live in New Mexico and do a Santa Fe restaurant. But I never actually became, what's the word, certified as a sommelier. I gave up at the very end because I realized I wasn't going to go into this. I was running an IT business early years, and
Yeah.
I just loved wine, and it was a good excuse and a lot of education.
Fun.
So I just wanted to comment that I've never seen anybody break down levels of delegation before, and it's a great training wheel approach to getting a lot of us to do delegation. I tend to be all or none, and that's not a great call. So now I have a framework. So I want to say,
Well, I wrote an article about this as well that I can share with Dan. I have a column on Inc.com. If you check Inc.com levels of delegation, you'll see the article.
Okay.
And it's more specific than I was in that brief conversation. But yeah, I hear you. It scares the heck. You're in a lot of good company, Josh. I mean, there's lots of people that have exactly that issue.
all right, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, who's next? Heather? Oh,
I got a question for the group. So let's say you're trying to you want to delegate stuff. Like I've got a small office. There's only 4 of us here. I kind of feel like I shouldn't be the one taking the trash out, mopping the floors, vacuuming, all that. Could get a cleaning company, but is there a way that you can nicely ask employees that like they want to be techs and consider themselves techs to do stuff so you don't have to do it? Is there a polite way to ask that?
Well, okay, let's talk about low value work like janitorial services. I think you have to think about the opportunity cost of doing that work versus other work you could be doing, like winning another client or improving performance in another way.
Oh, exactly. You don't have to convince me on that.
Oh,
I
you're
just
on that.
feel-
But
I just,
it's about
I just
so the
feel
question is,
weird
how do I
asking my
convince people
guys to do it.
to do their job?
Well, yeah, it's like you hired them to be help desk tech
Yep.
or, that. But now you're going to ask them to empty the baskets.
Duties is otherwise assigned.
Right. Is there a polite way to be like, hey, part of being a team member here is sometimes doing these things?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, same argument for them about opportunity cost. Why are you having somebody you're paying tech money doing janitorial services that you can pay $15 an hour to have somebody do? But put that aside for the moment. I think this is a leadership trait of demonstrating the behavior. So you need to show that you're willing to take out the garbage to demonstrate to them that they are not above taking out the garbage. So I think you got to lead by example on this one and say, look, I'm happy to take it out, but everybody's got to grab their turn. When a thing's overflowing, just bring it outside. It's not a big deal. And as long as you're consistent in demonstrating you are willing to do it, you can expect other people to do it. I'm not asking you to do anything that I don't do, but you can't play the game of, I'm not doing it because it's beneath me. But you, on the other hand, lowly plebeian, it's not beneath
right,
you.
That's the message I didn't want to send. Yeah.
You can't. You got to demonstrate that you're willing to do it as well. And then it's fair to ask other people to do it. It's not beneath me. It's not beneath you.
We'd have the same issue here, Mike. It's not weird. And about 6 years ago, when we moved in this building I bought, it's so nice that helped a lot. We used to work in what looked like a converted barber shop, but now that we have a really professional building, people have more ownership of it. I just, everybody has to feel some ownership of the look of the professionalism of the space, and getting them to see me do the work for probably a year was enough to get them to take it over. I mean, I asked them to, and they did, and it's been done well.
excellent. Jim, one thing that I'd love to have you expand on is you talk about the moat around your castle. And you create this moat to be able to do 2 things. One, to be able to keep competitors out, but also to be able to keep your clients in. And can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, and this is a Warren Buffett concept that I stole ruthlessly. So to the extent that you do hard things, let's just phrase it as that, the more hard things you do, the bigger your moat is. And if we've solved hard problems and we do hard things, anybody else that wants to do what we do has to figure those hard problems out and do the hard thing. And that expands over time the moat. And doing hard things and solving hard problems equals profitability and gross margin, right? Easy things to solve. Like, let's take janitorial services. If you were to open one, how much money do you really think you're going to make? Anybody could do it. There's no barriers to entry. There's almost no moat around that business. Maybe finding the people would be the one moat, but a very easy business. So limited moat because it's not hard. If you're solving hard problems and doing hard things, the moat tends to be larger, which earns you the right to make higher profitability. Okay. So that's sort of one way to think about a moat around your business. So every time you have an opportunity to expand the moat by solving other hard problems or making your business more difficult to replicate, this is all business model stuff. It's the architect hat. The better off you are, the higher profitability you should have. So Buffett talks about investing in businesses with very large moats. Sometimes that's with a brand, like he invests in Coca-Cola. He's like, if you and I, all of us wanted to say, we're going to copy Coca-Cola and we're going to come up with a company, well, good luck, right? The brand is worth billions and billions of dollars. You're never going to replicate Coca-Cola. It's got a gigantic moat. In that case, it's brand. You guys, it might be more of solving a technical problem or the nature of your domain expertise or the nature of your customers. There's a lot of ways to do moats. So that's sort of one. The other is, and this is, I'm going to say is a little controversial, which is in data intensive businesses, one of the moats you have is that you've got the client's data and it is not easy for them to come off your system. Now, when we sell, anybody's ever bought Salesforce or any CRM, they go, oh yeah, just give us a ring. We'll just transfer, put the cocaine back in Coke. Now that might do the trick, Eric. Yeah, he totally took me off my game. When we're selling a CRM, they say, oh, if you want to transfer your data off the platform, like no big deal, just let us know and download the file and off you go. But anybody who's ever been through that process, it is painfully difficult to move it over and map it and make sure it works properly. And so they have effectively got, call it an activation energy or a cost of changing that keeps customers inside the castle. It's effectively a moat to exit the castle, if you will, which is what Dan was talking about. And so you got to do it in a way. This is why it's controversial. If I was really ugly about this, nobody would ever put their data into my system because they're like, I know this is a horrible, horrible system to ever get off of, or they're painfully difficult. So you have to sort of represent you can get out, but you don't have to make it super easy either. It's like if anybody's ever tried to cancel, if you want to buy cable services for your house, they will be there this afternoon ready to put it in. Have you ever tried to cancel your cable service? Right? 47 phone calls. You got to jump over the man-eating lion. You got to swim across the shark-infested waters. And then there's somebody who's open from 11:30 to 11:45 every morning, right? I mean, they make it hugely difficult to exit.
They used to call this Hotel California. Now they call it Caseo, but yeah, we get that.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what we're talking about. Now, I'm going to say you can't be a jerk about it, but it does exist that there's an energy of exit and you can play with that energy of exit.
Yeah, and there's that component of it where you think about, are your clients, we should be thinking about this often. Are they with us only because it would be more painful to leave for them? But there's that balance of, there's one thing about the pain of leaving. The pain should be focused more on, they help us in our business to such an extent, it's beyond the commodity aspect of what managed services is. They truly are, not focused on the blinky lights. They're focused on our business process improvement, and they're helping us to drive our business forward. They are truly an asset to the organization versus just an expense.
And I think about, moats of exit is they just buy you time that you should invest in making sure you do exactly what Dan talked about, deliver immense value. So they don't even think about leaving. You don't want them like, well, they're all thinking about leaving, but we made it so painful they don't leave. That's not where you want to be. It's right. We made it hard to leave, so we bought ourselves some times to get good enough that they never want to leave. I think that's the balance to be thinking about.
Yeah. Absolutely. Other questions out there?
Can I
Heather?
ask a question? Hey, Jim, I'm like 3/4 of the way through your book, so I did not do my homework.
Nah.
But and I agree with a lot of what the book says, and some of it I've read in other places and things like that. But running an MSP, you're just so invested in the day-to-day stuff. And you're kind of saying, take a step back and empower other people and do what's most important. If you had to pick one area that I should focus on, or that we should focus on first, what would that be?
Grow your revenue or grow your margin. Profitability solves all problems, right? So if you say, I can't get to it because I can't hire the people, I go, well, grow your revenue or grow your margin. You'll be able to afford the people.
But isn't
So-
that a catch-22? Because if you don't have the people for increased revenue, then you're going to fail somewhere along the line.
Yeah, and this is where you've got to find a way to delegate. You've got to find a way to take somebody who's not quite ready and give them a job to free up space on your calendar to go do the things that are actually, these are the things that will get you out of the hole and get you to the next level. I mean, even if you have to sacrifice performance in a less important area to create the time to spend on the most important area, that's a good trade to make.
See, and I think
So-
what you just said is key. And a lot of people don't realize that. And I was wondering if we were kind of on the same page or not, because you didn't come black and white and say that in your book, or at least 3/4 of the way you did.
Nah, it's like, it's actually 80% of the way in. So just read it. No,
Okay,
I may
so
not,
I've got another 5%.
no,
But
I may not have
just
actually
wanted-
said it in so many words, honestly. I may not
Okay,
have.
because that's kind of what I was thinking, but I needed some validation that I was going in the right direction.
Yeah, you have to, at some point I do talk about boxing out and creating space.
You
That's
did.
really what you're doing. You're creating space to invest more appropriately. And by getting rid of some low value work, that's what the not do list is really designed to do, is get rid of the junk that's not adding a lot of value so I can spend more time on the value added. That's exactly what it's designed to do.
My
Okay,
accountant's got a philosophy where he always wants to have capacity. He never wants his
Yeah.
people working full time. He always wants to have extra capacity, and when they start to get close to capacity, hire somebody else.
That's interesting.
Well, that's a service delivery first attitude, and it's the opposite of the just-in-time and do more with less mentality that American business has moved towards or to for decades now. It describes how we behave, but we're not a big company.
There's a couple things based on what Heather was talking about that kind of jump in that I want to cover. And you talk a lot about capital velocity in the book, but also I guess I want to tie into what Heather's saying and what you commented about is not all revenue is really good revenue, right? And we got to really focus on what is the most value. How do we determine? We talk a lot about the client that's not the ideal client that we should really fire and move away from. And can you give us a little more background just in advice in that area?
So, if you profile your ideal customer, whatever that looks like for you, they've got budget, they've got a problem we solve really, really, really well. They appreciate when somebody does, they're not price shoppers, they're whatever the set is that makes them ideal. In a perfect world, all of your clients meet that profile. But we always take people that are, and this is particularly true of salespeople, all clients look like good clients to them because everyone looks like a commission to them. So they're going to convince you this is a great client because they want the commission, they want the revenue. The reality is, there's some kind of bell curve around that, or maybe a Poisson distribution around the quality of the client. And there's some that are crappy clients and some that are really, really crappy clients. And that comes in a couple of areas. And if you summed it up, it would be cost to serve in your business. So I would think about total cost to serve a client against the margin I make on that client. So if I had a very, very high margin client, but they were kind of a pain in the butt, it took a lot of cycles, I'd be like, I can live with that trade because I make enough on them that the cost to serve makes sense against the revenue and the margin. But usually what I find is the giant pains in the butts are also the ones that negotiate the heck out of your price. And so you've got a low margin, pain in the butt client. And if you did your little grid of which ones I want to keep and which ones I want to get rid of, they fall squarely in the get rid of, because cost to serve versus margin available just doesn't make sense. And in fact, many times when you do this analysis, you'll find that there's a chunk of your client base that literally, I joke, I go, they're losing you money every day they're on your platform, right? They literally cost money every single day. I used to joke when my salespeople say, you can't get rid of them. I go, look, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to send them $1,000 a month to go buy from somebody else, and I'll be money ahead, right? Because they're that big a loser. And so I think that's the first analysis, cost to serve versus margin. Just grid it up, and I think you'll have some conclusions about, wow, these 5 clients, I should not be serving them, or I should pay them money to go away. And you can do it nice. You can do it over time. You can help them, but let them be somebody else's problem. I used to love to hand those clients to my competitors personally. Right?
Yeah.
You know what? We're not for you, but I have got somebody who's going to take care of you so well. And I would hand them to a competitor, and I wasn't losing anything. And as you know, so that's how
pain and suffering key on 2 clients, because I wanted them to go away and I wanted to price them out so we could just part ways, and both of them resigned.
Then you didn't go. Then you didn't go high enough.
Now.
You didn't go high. Oh, it's enough that it makes sense for you.
Oh, and they kind of closed their mouths a little bit because I'm charging them a lot. And I think they kind of realized that I was just like, nope, this is the way it is. I'm not.
Yep. I love price them up or price them out.
It's right in there. Pain and suffering.
Yeah, it's like a jury trial. You're going to pay for pain and suffering, right?
Yeah.
I had one of those that went like that, and then I had another one that I tried to come up with a number of what I thought it would cost for me to take care of them, and then that number was so crazy that I'm like, what if they said yes? Then I got to hire the people to put up with them, and I'm like, that I can't do. So So there was literally no number. Exactly, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
that's a fine answer.
With both these customers right now. And I'm thinking, well, now what's my pain and suffering? But we haven't heard from them in so long. They've been actually acting pretty normal. So now
now you got the nice situation. They're quiet and you're making good margin on them. I'll keep all of those.
We'll see.
I mean, there's also that balancing act too, depending on the scenario of, if that revenue is so critical to you operating your business, you have to have that balancing act of, do I, front load new clients that are the ideal fit, then do the, price them out type scenario versus pricing them out now and then seeking out replacement revenue.
Well, I like the dilution solution on this one. I've got to dilute in good clients, and then I can find till the point I think I can get rid of the ugly client. If they're big though, like they're 20-30% of your revenue, it's painful, right? Because you're going to take a little downward slope. There's almost no way to make it to compensate for that. So you're going to take the hickey, but then you go, you know what? My life will be better. My employees will be happier. I'll make more money in the long run. It's worth it.
So you just brought up an interesting question is when you take a look at, if they're 20-30% of your revenue, what is that magic number? You never want to have that elephant that if you lose is going to have such a huge impact on your business. What would you say is the magic number as far as a client, percentage of your revenue?
5 to 10% maximum.
Yeah, I would have said 10.
But that, none of us here is going to turn away a whale of a client that we can support well, that isn't too noisy. So what happens in our case, they developed into it and they're pushing 18%. I'm not going to run them off because they're so profitable. That would be silly. It just means we're forced to backfill. We're forced to dilute the solution so that it doesn't become quite so strong. And unfortunately, that's the biggest challenge. You go find 4 or 8 small clients so that one whale doesn't, become such a risk. It's really hard. I mean, it is a good problem to have.
It is basically what you developed is you've risked up the business because of the customer concentration. If you're ever to sell it, a buyer would look at that and go, I may have to discount the price a little bit because if I lose that client, this is a very different business. I've had a couple clients and they go, the good news is I won I won Walmart. The bad news is I won Walmart because now they're 60, 70% of my business. And there are no other clients that'll be big enough to compensate for that and get them down to 10 or 15%. Not possible. But am I going to turn away the business? Of course, I'm not going to turn away the business. So it is a difficult problem. There are actually some larger companies say, look, we refuse to be more than 20% of your business. We don't want that to happen as a buyer because we know that if we ever left, we'd put you out of business and we don't want that rep. IBM had that position for a very long time. They refused to be over 20% of your business. So it's a risk conversation. And you can live like this. You just got a bit more risk in your business. That's all.
It's very risky to share the information that they are such a large part of your business with a lot of companies, because of course, their natural tendency most likely is to leverage that.
Yeah.
You mentioned negotiating prices. And this is, I think, one of the industry where the least of that happens, at least amongst mature MSPs. I can't remember a service price negotiation I've made in 13 years. There's been some negotiation on quantity on product, but services, I don't remember changing the price for somebody ever since we became an MSP in 2010. Maybe it happened, but I don't remember. It's rare. I mean, am I wrong? Do other people negotiate your price structure as a regular thing?
I
Does
don't.
that dilution that you're talking about, would it also apply to verticals? Because one of the things I've been hearing for 30 years is you should have a vertical, but we never had a vertical. But I know two guys during COVID, one of them specialized in chiropractors, the other one in dentists. They were practically out of business.
Yep.
Because all those places shut down.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is the better you are in a vertical, it's easier to win more business in the vertical because you get the lingo, you know what's important, you can cut to the chase. The bad news, like a stock portfolio, if all I've got is tech stocks or all I've got is dental stocks and dental stocks get whacked, then I've got a problem on my hands. So I'd prefer a little more diversity in industry as well, but it's a risk conversation.
As we were starting to talk about the one client and then growing your business so that client was 10% and all that kind of stuff. Is there a certain size where you think that an MSP would have to be so that everything didn't fall to the owner, or so that the owner wasn't wearing so many hats, the technician hat and the CEO hat?
What's the average margin in this industry? 20%, something like that.
You asking for the EBITDA on a year for a typical MSP, or are you asking about margin on?
No, gross margin
on a product or a service?
Overall business.
Yeah,
service.
Blended.
50%?
Somewhat. 50%.
Yeah.
I try and maintain 75% gross profitability on the green.
Well, for us, it was 48.3 last year,
Right.
but that's before all your fixed expenses.
There is an industry expert on the operations side that, talks about focusing on, gross margin being at 70%.
All right. So let's use 70% because that'll help me scale it on. I'm going to scale on revenue. That's why I asked the question. So understanding margin helps me. You can compare companies better on gross margin than you can on revenue. That's why I asked the question. If I was a trading business with a 6% margin, the number where you could have a full executive team is different than if I have 75% margins, right? That's why I asked the question. So I'm going to say $20 million. You should be pretty close to having a blown out executive team. 25 revenue. 5, not big enough. 15 marginal, unless you're aggressive on hiring people. 20, 25. You got $14 million of margin there. If I had $1 million invested in an executive team of 2 or 3 really heavy hitters that are with me at the table, sure, no problem. And that means you should be able to elevate most of the way, if not all the way, to CEO. And that's generally when we get clients, when somebody's sort of at the 20, 25 million range, they go, I now have an executive team. I now have to learn how to be a great CEO. And that's sort of what we help them with. So I see people at that threshold saying, I'm now only, and here's the problem. They go, I'm now the CEO. I'm no longer sales guy or engineering lead or whatever the thing I was doing. And I'm not quite certain what I do for a living right now because nobody really ever taught me what the job was. That's what we help with. So that's why I'm thinking that's about the threshold in your industry as well.
So in the area of the book, you talk about capital velocity. And I'd love for you to kind of just delve into that for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think this is a metric of goodness of a business. And you could think about it, it's return on assets. We don't normally talk much about return on assets, but that's actually a really critical, as an investor, maybe owner, the return on assets really important. And that is, the total cash flow, not EBITDA, but cash flow divided by the assets involved in the business. Assets include the plant and equipment. You guys, that's a significant number, but also the accounts receivable is an asset. That's cash utilization minus the accounts payable, plus any inventory, which you would have nominal inventory. And the faster I can get, I can't really move the plant and equipment, but I can move the receivables and the payables. So the velocity at which that money moves through. So let's say that the money cycles through the business one time and I make a 10% cash flow EBITDA on that. If I can make that revenue, that money roll through the business more times a year, in other words, high cash velocity, then my return on assets goes up. And as an investor, I like that. The really crazy example here is McDonald's hamburgers. So McDonald's buys their hamburgers with 30-day terms, okay? And 30 days after it hits the store, hits the restaurant. The average McDonald's holds their burger inventory 7 days or less. Well, let's use 7 days. So it's day 7, they cook it, they serve it to you. You pay with cash or credit card. They immediately have their cash. And they have 30 minus 7, 23 days before they ever have to pay their vendors. They are literally negative cash in their business. Their cash velocity on that particular product is insane. So what's the return on assets when I'm negative cash? Well, it's essentially infinite. You will unlikely get to that position. Same thing's true, by the way, for Pampers. Procter & Gamble put Pampers into Walmart, 30-day terms. It gets pulled off the shelf, purchased. Walmart gets the money immediately. They pay Procter & Gamble, 30 days later. It's negative cash for them. So those are the extreme examples of cash velocity, but all of us should be thinking about how do we increase our payables, stretch our suppliers a little bit because they're relatively cheap banking, and shrink our receivables to increase our cash velocity and improve the rate of return on our business. So that's the gist of the idea. As I said, when you're very capital intensive, it's a little harder to do because you can't move the big capital nut very much.
But we, as MSPs, since most of us, if not all of us, pre-bill a month in advance.
Love that.
Cash velocity is built into our structure, and many of our commitments allow us 15 to 30 days to pay.
Beautiful.
So it does work out pretty well. We have that advantage, and that's why I think short of COVID challenges, most MSPs aren't cash challenged, but that doesn't make them profitable necessarily.
No, this is only a cash conversation. It's not a profitability conversation, but it's helpful. And then I think if you leased your equipment, you've now matched cash flow to cash out, and that could be a pretty interesting model.
Well, having stuff in the cloud is kind of like leasing. You're not.
It's pay as you use it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do you do mention that in the book, leasing versus CapEx on equipment. And in my MSP, that's always been a large focus, is all of our clients and getting them on a leasing program. The beauty is it's utility computing. Every 3 years we're replacing computers, and it's never a question for them. And are there other reasons that you have where you recommend that for companies?
Yeah, I mean, I love cash paying on a cash flow basis versus a lump sum basis because it matches the cash flow of the client. And so, the client has a business, it generates cash for them. If what they pay you matches their cash flow, they don't have to go get a loan. Or, for example, I'm involved in a nearshore offshore call center business. And when you're opening up new capacity, you got seats and cubicles and computers. It's a fairly capital intensive chunk to get into it. We've moved to a full leased model there. We don't own that stuff. We lease it all or rent it. And that matches our cash flow of our clients buying capacity and our outflow matches. And so, you might think that software as a service or a lease-based model is not desirable, but I'm going to say from a cash management point of view of your client, it's actually highly desirable. The CFO is going to love this answer. They go, you mean I don't have to go to the bank and get a loan? Love it. So it's not a bad, and you can actually build in an implicit interest rate if you want to. So you've actually got a little vig on the cash that you're deploying.
Right. Awesome. Jim, we are at the top of the hour. I want to
Yeah.
respect your time. I greatly appreciate your time today. Very insightful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a great pleasure. Alrighty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.